So guys, let's talk about in this course about concrete. You will be learning about, I'll be focusing mainly on concrete materials, then types of concrete, grades of concrete, advantages of concrete, tests performed to check the workability of concrete at site, and the calculation of water cement ratio for mixed design. So now let's see what is a concrete. Concrete is one of the most widely used and versatile building material. It is made up of different ingredients which has various functions. Concrete as a building material which is made from cement, aggregate, that is crushed rock and sand, and water mixed in definite proportion. So the properties of concrete mainly depends on mixing of these ingredients. So concrete acts as a binder material that binds the materials together, and cement in combination with aggregate acts as a strong building material. So all these ingredients help in modifying the properties of fresh as well as hardened concrete. If you say in short, these materials are like members of a family, and they perform their individual role in such a manner that they contribute to overall success of the concrete as a whole family. So we often think that concrete can easily be made by carrying out few simple steps. However, in reality, this is not the situation. Actually, mixing of concrete ingredients with proper proportion is a must. Therefore, concrete mix design is carried out to choose particular concrete ingredients. Let's see briefly about the concrete ingredients. The three basic materials or ingredients in the concrete mix are cement, water, and aggregate. Aggregate compromises of rock and crushed rock and sand. Now cement. Cement and water form a paste that coats the aggregate and sand in the concrete mix. The paste hardens and binds the aggregates and sand together. Water is needed to chemically react with the cement, that is a hydration process, and to provide workability with the concrete. The amount of water in the concrete mix compared with the amount of cement is called the water cement ratio. The lower the water cement ratio, the stronger the concrete is. So that is the concretes will have higher strength and less permeability. So if you say about aggregates, there are two types of aggregates, as we all know. That is a fine aggregate and the coarse aggregate. Sand comes under the fine aggregate, and crushed stones and gravel comes under coarse aggregate, which is most important for concrete mixes. Now let's see about the types of concrete. There are many types of concrete used for construction. Most of the names are self-explanatory here. So I'm not going in detail about the types of concrete because it's a vast topic. So I'm just letting you know about the names, about the types of concrete. Let's see the types of concrete. It is like plain or ordinary concrete, lightweight concrete, which has lightweight material as aggregates, high density concrete, reinforced concrete, which is normally used for all type of constructions in the industry, precast concrete, pre-stressed concrete, air entrained concrete, rapid hardening concrete, glass concrete, lime concrete, asphalt concrete, roller compacted concrete, stamped concrete, pumped concrete, vacuum concrete, shotcrete, permeable concrete, ready mix concrete, which is like they mix the concrete in a batching plant and will be readily available at site through crusher units. Then fiber reinforced concrete, high strength concrete, silica fume concrete, polymer concrete, which is of 4 types again, and ferrocement concrete and pre-packed concrete. So now let's see about the grades of concrete. What is a grade of concrete? Actually, concrete grades are denoted as M10, M5, M20, M25 like this, where this M denotes the mixed design of concrete followed by that number is the compressive strength attained in 28 days, which is denoted in Newton per mm square. And this mix is respective ingredient proportion of cement, sand, and aggregate. So let's see in detail about this concrete grade and mix ratio. So this is the concrete grade. Nowadays, we have normally categorized the concrete grade into normal grade, standard grade, and high strength grade concrete. The normal grade concrete consists of M5 to M20 grade and which is normally used as PCC. We don't use for reinforced, and it is not used for any construction type nowadays. Standard grade is what we use for normal building construction, that is from M25 to M45 depending upon the structure. And high strength concrete we use in places of dams, construction of dams, water retaining structures like this, where DM denotes the design mix. All these other concrete grades have a mix ratio in which is in the proportion indicated here, like cement, sand, aggregate. From M30 till M70 we have to prepare the mix design. So now let's see about the classification and grades of concrete. This grade of concrete is further classified into four categories, like lean concrete, ordinary grade of concrete, standard grade of concrete, and high strength grade of concrete. If you see, M5 and M7.5 grade is categorized under lean concrete. In this concrete, the amount of cement is lower than the amount of liquid, and it is mainly used to prevent the direct contact of foundation concrete from the soil. It is not used in other than this, it is not used in any constructions. Now let's see about the ordinary grade concrete. Concrete grade from M10 till M15 is used for the is used as a PCC for below the footing. That is where this ordinary grade concrete. It will be in the mixed ratio of 1:3:6. Next is the standard grade concrete. Standard grade concrete consists of M25 to M40 grade, and it is used in the construction of all structural elements like footings, columns, beams, RC walls, slabs, etc. And next is the high strength concrete. High strength concrete grade is mainly from M60 and M80. It is used in the construction of coastal construction of spillways for dams, construction of passage for surplus water for a dam. Then it is used in the construction of RCC work where a high compressive strength is required, and in the use of high-rise buildings, long span bridges, etc. So this is where it is categorized into. So now let's see about this is what high strength concrete, what I have discussed now. So let's see the advantages of concrete. So the advantages of concrete. Concrete basically has high compressive strength. It is a corrosion resistant material, and that's why we use for reinforced concrete structures, and it hardens with age. It is economical than steel and binds rapidly with steel reinforcement bars. It has a tendency to shrink and a tendency to be porous, then forms a hard surface and resists abrasion. Now let's check what are the tests which is performed in site to identify the workability of the concrete, because workability of concrete is the main process in which it withstands the structural stability of a building. So now let's see the tests for workability of concrete. Everyone knows that concrete is a primary material in construction. If there is any deficiency in the concrete manufacture or other concreting process such as batching, mixing, transporting, placing, or compaction, etc., then it is directly affects the quality of the construction. So the process has to be done with adequate care, and for that workability of concrete has to be maintained according to the nature of work. So now let's see, the workability of concrete is indicated as an ease of work with fresh concrete. Therefore, it is necessary to measure the workability of fresh concrete after manufacturing or before pouring of concrete at site. The various reasons for failure of workability of concrete are addition of excess or less water to the actual quantity required as per the design mix, then poor inspection at batching and mixing plant, poor grading of aggregates, then improper mixing and batching of concrete, then poor quality of concrete ingredients like cement, aggregate, sand, water, etc. So if the workability test fails, then it is strongly recommended to reject that material and use it for some non-structural work. Now let's see the 5 tests to check the workability of concrete. Concrete samples are collected from large batch of concrete and their workability is tested by the following test. That is the slump cone test, compaction factor test, flow table test, VB consistometer test, and Kelly ball test. So let's see an overview of the test. I'm not going in depth with the test procedures. So now let's see what is a slump cone. Why slump test? Due to the fault in the batching plant, the proportion or weight of cement or aggregate or water are not properly maintained as specified in the concrete mix design report. Sometimes workers might mix extra water at site to get the flexibility in ongoing concrete pouring and makes a concrete poor. Hence, poor knowledge of workers may lead to the poor workability of concrete. In this case, the improper batching of concrete results in poor workability of concrete. The concrete slump, that is a concrete slump test or slump cone test, is the most common test which is done at site for checking the workability of fresh mixed concrete, which can be either done at site or in the laboratory. To maintain the workability and quality of fresh concrete, it is necessary to check each batch for inspection of the concrete slump. This can be easily done with concrete slump test. The slump test is the simplest test to determine the workability of concrete that involves low cost and provides immediate results. Next is the compaction factor test. This test works on the principle of determining the degree of compaction, that is the vibration, which is achieved by a standard amount of work done by allowing the concrete to fall from a certain height, certain standard height. This is specially designed for laboratory use, but in some circumstances we use it. It can be used in the site also. Compaction factor test of concrete is more precise and sensitive than the concrete slump test. Hence, it is more favorable and useful for low workable concrete, that is dry concrete, where the mix ratio of water is less and is generally used when concrete is to be compacted by vibration. Next is the flow table test. Flow table test is a laboratory test and it gives an indication of the quality of concrete with respect to workability and consistency. In this flow test, a standard mass of concrete is subjected to jolting. This test is generally used for very high workability concrete. This method is used for high to very high workable concrete, which could exhibit the that collapse slump. So next is the VB consistometer test. So this VB consistometer test is a laboratory test again, and it is done on fresh concrete to measure the workability in an indirect way. This VB test is usually performed on dry concrete and it is not suitable for wet concrete. It determines the mobility and to some extent compatibility of concrete. In this VB consistometer test, vibrator is used. So the test determines the time required for the transformation of concrete by the vibration. So it is actually done using vibrators. So Kelly ball test. Kelly ball test is a simple and inexpensive field test that is used to measure the workability of concrete, similar to the concrete slump test. It is more accurate and faster than the slump test. This test uses a device that consists of a metal hemisphere, that is a ball type, thereby indicating the consistency of fresh concrete by its level of penetration. The metal hemisphere or the ball is dropped from a certain height, and in this test, the depth is determined through metal hemisphere, which sinks under its own weight into the fresh concrete. So now let's see about a small calculation to calculate the water cement ratio for mixed design. So are you aware of what code is used for calculating the water cement ratio for mixed design?
If you have an answer, please put it in the chat box. IS 456. Janani mentioned IS 456.
Yes. Okay. So no, it is not the code which is used for the water cement to calculate the water cement ratio. It is IS 10262 1982. IS 456 is a normal code for RCC. It is a reinforced concrete code, but this water cement ratio for mixed design is calculated using IS 10262. So now let's see how we have to calculate the water cement cement ratio. Here I have just given a procedure, and thereby I am going to explain with an example. Now the data required is, first we have to calculate the target mean strength of concrete with using the formula Ft is equal to FCK plus 1.65 S, where S is the standard deviation and FCK, as we all know, that it is a compressive strength of concrete. This table I have taken from IS 10262. Table 8, where they have given the standard assumed standard deviation for M10 to M50 grade concrete. Step 2 is to calculate from the water cement ratio. So here first we calculate the target mean strength from the earlier part, and we check it along with the graph provided here, which is which versus the 28 compressive strength of concrete given in Newton per mm square to the water cement ratio. Ideally, the cement we are going to use in concrete mix design or the test the compressive strength of that cement at 7 days, and we get a value. We can get this result from testing the compressive strength of cement and also get data from the manufacturer of the cement. Either way, we can get it. So in this, we will get the water cement ratio. We normally get 3 values for this water cement ratio. We identify in 3 steps. This is the first step where we get one water cement ratio using this graph, compressive strength versus water cement ratio. This graph indicates the 28-day compressive strength with 7-day strength of cement. This is a second graph. Here also we will get a water cement ratio value. And this A to F curve line indicates the 7-day compressive strength of cement, and 28 days compressive strength is the target mean strength which we have calculated earlier. So it will be better, you will understand clearly when I go in with the example. So this third step is where we will get the water cement ratio. This table is taken from IS 456. This depends upon the environmental exposure of cement. Is what the value indicated here as mild, moderate, severe, very severe, and extreme. Now let's see the example. I've solved a problem here for a better understanding. So now the data collected here is, I'm doing it for an M30 grade of concrete. That is a calculation of water cement ratio for mixed design M30 grade of concrete as per IS 1026/2009. So now the data collected is grade of concrete is M30, exposure condition is moderate, grade of cement is M33, that is ordinary Portland cement, and FCK, the compressive strength is 30 Newton per mm square. For M30 grade, we all know that FCK is 30 Newton per mm square. So the standard deviation for M13 from the nearby chart, if you see, for M30 to 50 grade, the standard deviation value is 5 Newton per mm square. I have taken it from here. So I've calculated the target mean strength of concrete using the formula Ft is equal to FCK plus 1.65 S. So this S denotes the standard deviation, and I've applied this value 5 in this formula, and I've arrived at the target mean strength of concrete as 38.25 Newton per mm square. So using the first step, the first graph, that is the compressive strength versus the water cement ratio, I've calculated the water cement ratio, that is as indicated here. I've taken a graph 38.25. I've taken it in the 28 compressive strength, and I've drawn a straight line in the curve so that it reaches to the value of 0.39. So the assumed water cement ratio as per step 1 or the first graph is 0.39. So the second step is the other second graph. I'm taking the same value of 28 compressive strength, 38.25, and this, why I have taken the D curve line is, if you see below, I have highlighted here That is, I've taken a grade of 30 Newton per mm square, and my value is between 38.25. So if you see, the D values are in between 35 to 41.5 Newton per mm square. So with this value, I've taken this D curve and I've calculated the water cement ratio value as 0.42. That is why I've indicated here the assumed water cement ratio is 0.42. Next is step 3. This water cement ratio, it is on the moderate, exposure condition is moderate, and hence I've taken the reinforced concrete value of as moderate, and the maximum free water cement ratio as 0.5 from the table from IS 456. The limited, this is the value of water cement ratio, limited water cement ratio value exposed to environmental condition. And here I have received the water cement ratio as 0.5. So now we have to compare all the three values, and we have to take the lower value as water cement ratio value. So here, hence our water cement ratio for M30 grade concrete, which has to be used for design mix, is 0.39. This is how we calculate the water cement ratio for using it for the design mix. Hope I have made it clear. If you have any doubts, please message it in the chat box so that I can clarify here before going on with my next session.
Great. Go ahead, Anu.
Okay. So this water cement, I think.
So there was one question with what is grade of cement?
M30 is the grade of cement what I've used. I explained earlier.
Okay, great. I think you can go ahead, Anu.
Okay. So this water cement ratio is the most important factor which can affect the properties of concrete in the plastic stage as well as in the hardened stage. So we have to be very careful in selecting the water cement ratio. Because of improper calculation of water cement ratio, it gives an adverse effect like bleeding or decrease in strength of concrete, or decrease in durability of concrete, etc. These steps will help you to calculate the water cement ratio in the design of concrete mix, so that you can control the quality of concrete. So with this, I end my session on concrete technology, and next I am going on with So I'm going on with my session on structural elements. Yeah. So in this session, we will be learning about the basic structural elements of a building. That is, the basic components of a building structure are foundation, columns, beams, slabs, etc. These elements serve the purpose of supporting, enclosing, and protecting the building structure. So we will be learning about the types of these structural elements, various types depending upon their shape. They are categorized depending upon the construction and their construction methodology. So first, let's see what is a foundation. Yeah. Foundation is also termed as footings and are the critical part of a structure. That is the basement of the structure. So footings are structural elements that transmit load of the entire superstructure to the underlying soil below the structure. So footings are designed to transmit these loads to the soil without exceeding its safe bearing capacity. That is why we use normally the SBC to calculate the foundation design, while doing the design, to calculate the size of the footing. Thus, the footing prevents the excessive settlement of the structure to a tolerable limit, and minimizes the differential settlement and prevents sliding and overturning of the building. So let's now see how the loads are transferred to the footing. Soil is the root support of the footing. So all the forces that come in contact with the footings will be transferred to the soil. And the soil has to bear all these loads and is controlled by an aspect called bearing capacity. That is a soil bearing capacity. The soil bearing capacity changes from one type of soil to another, and it is the key factor in estimating the size of footings, as I said. So now the foundation is the lower part of the building structure, and transfers all the gravity loads and lateral loads acting on the structure towards the soil. Once the foundation is packed or hardened, tightly packed or hardened, then we can begin build the superstructure. Normally, foundation are generally divided into two categories, that is the shallow foundation and the deep foundation. Now let's see what is a shallow foundation. Shallow foundation or normal foundation type, and it is again divided into 5 types, that is depending upon the size, requirement of the if the number that we will be seeing in detail. So shallow foundation are of 5 types, that is isolated footing, combined footing, strip footing, strap footing, raft or mat footing. Deep foundation are of 2 types, pile foundation and drilled shafts or caissons. Now let's see what is a shallow foundation. This is a basic thumb rule while you design, or you have to keep it in mind while designing or reading the drawings given for shallow foundation. Normally in a shallow foundation, the width to depth ratio of the shallow foundation is less than 1. And the depth of foundation bed is normally less than 5 times the width of the foundation. And the nominal depth of foundation bed is below 3 meters from the ground level and does not exceed 5 meters. Normally, we don't go below 5 meters. If the soil is very bad, then we go in with other type of foundation. We don't go with isolated footing. We don't go with shallow foundation. We go with either pile or raft, any kind of foundation. So now it is the isolated footing. So the first type of shallow foundation is isolated footing. Isolated footing is the simplest form of foundation, usually used worldwide depending upon the soil type. This single footings are structural elements used to distribute and transmit the load of a single column to the soil without exceeding its bearing capacity. In addition, to prevent excessive settlement and adequate safety against sliding and overturning. Furthermore, they are used in the case of light column loads where column are not closely placed, because the footing will be of a larger size, and if you propose a isolated footing for that type, both the footings will get clashed. So we normally provide in places where columns are of not closely spaced. So there are various types of isolated footing, such as spread footing, stepped footing, sloped footing, etc. They are usually of different shapes. If you see here, the popular shapes are square, rectangular, and circular. So isolated footings are one of the most economical types of footings and are used when columns are spaced at relatively long distance. And these type of footings are selected based on the soil condition. Footing is mainly depending upon the soil condition. Now let's see in detail about the pad footing. So now pad footing, that is the square footing. It is also called as a square footing. So it is constructed under each column independently and is usually square, rectangular, or circular in shape. So the thickness of flat isolated footing is uniform. This kind of footing is provided in places so as to reduce the bending moment and shear force at their critical sections. This footing is constructed with reinforced concrete to increase the ultimate load carrying capacity of that footing. So next is the sloped isolated footing. Normally, sloped or trapezoidal footings are designed and executed with more care, that they have to maintain a top slope of 45 degrees from all the sides. The amount of reinforcement and concrete used is in the sloped footing while construction is less than the pad footing. So normally we propose these kind of footing depending upon the cost and the type of structure. It also decreases the utilization of concrete and reinforcement. So next is the stepped footing. This type of footing is used in the construction and construction of residential houses, and it is a popular one. But nowadays, this application has declined a lot. It is generally used in residential buildings only. Its stepped footings are stacked upon one another as steps, and these three concrete cross sections should lie in the same line. So isolated foundation are so these are the types of isolated footing, and and now let's see about the combined footing. Combined footing is constructed when two or more columns are close to each other, so that their footings doesn't clash with each other or overlap with each other. Even though it is a combination of isolated footings, the design of this combined footing is completely different. The combined footing can be of trapezoidal or rectangular in shape. Trapezoidal footing is adapted when load from one column is greater than the other column, because one column might take up only little load and the other column will be spanning on a large distance, so that load will be higher. So to adjust that, we go in with trapezoidal combined footing. That is the designer's view to reduce the concrete to make it a sleek structure. So strap beams in combined footing is used when we go on with RCC walls. So next is the strip footing. Footings that support so many number of columns in a same row is known as strip footing. It is used in places where columns are closely packed. This is a type of continuous footing, and strip footing is used to transfer the load of closely placed columns to the ground in a uniform manner. Next, let's see about the strap footing. Strap footing is used when the columns are at the distance of the columns is the same like combined footing, and when the combined footing is large, so we don't want to pour a mass concrete, so that is where we go in with a strap type in between and connect the two isolated footings with a strap beam. So this type of footing is more economical in places where we go in with raft or mat foundation and the loads to the structure from the structure is very heavy. So these footings are also used in places where you have adjoining property or structure like compound wall, or you can't go in with separate footing. In those places, we go in with strap footing. Next is the mat or rat foundation. Mat or rat foundation, these are types of foundation that spread across the entire area of the building to support the heavy structural loads from columns and walls. So this is used to prevent differential settlement of individual footings and are designed as a single mat for all load bearing elements of the structure. So it is suitable for where the soil is expansive, or that is where the soil bulges and the bearing capacity of the soil is very less. And raft foundation is economical when one half of the area we go in with individual footings or wall footings, and half the area we go in with raft footing, where the load, where you get heavy loads from the structure. So if you go in with mat foundation or raft foundation, is very expensive, and normally we adapt this kind of foundations for high rise buildings and where the soil is very bad. These foundations and cannot be used where the groundwater table is above the bearing surface of the soil. That is where the groundwater table is near the ground level. So next we will see about the pile foundation. So pile foundation is a type of deep foundation which is used to transfer heavy loads from the structure to a hard rock strata or much below the ground level. This kind of deep foundation is recommended in places where the water table of the soil is above, or if the soil is of clayey type. So this pile foundation is named as a pile since the depth is 3 times its breadth. So this pile foundation are generally used in soils where soil conditions are or where the building where the soil has to withstand heavy loads from the building, and the soil is very clayey, then we have to definitely go in with pile foundation. This pile is drilled to a depth of 5 meters to 50 meters, depending upon where where the hard rock strata reaches. So the pile foundation is like a slender column below the soil, which used to transfer the load at desired depth, either by end bearing or skin friction. The use of pile foundation prevents the differential settlement of foundation, and these piles are connected to by using pile caps for connecting the column and wall. Now let's see the types of pile foundation. So there are two types of pile foundation. As I said, the end bearing pile and the friction pile. So what is an end bearing pile? End bearing pile is a type of pile in which the bottom end of the pile should rest on a hard strata. That is, the interaction point will be between the hard layer and the weak layer. That is where we will rest that pile. It might go from 5 meters to 50 meters. This pile transfers the load to the structure to the hard strata by passing through all the weak layers. This end bearing pile will act as a separate column under the ground. And next is the friction pile. This is completely different from the end bearing pile. This pile transfers the load along the full length, maintaining the friction between the soil and the pile. So it transfers the load through these frictions. So the entire surface of the friction pile transfers load to the soil. The longer the friction pile, more amount of loads it can support. So now you can see in this picture, the friction pile is the first one, and the second one is the weak soil, and we have rested the soil in the hard soil strata. So this is the difference between friction pile and the end bearing pile. So the pile is further classified depending upon the material used, the purpose of use, and the construction methodology. So depending upon the material used, it is categorized into concrete pile, steel pile, and timber pile. And based on the purpose of use, it is categorized into sheet pile, load bearing pile, and soil compaction pile. Piles based on construction method are cast in situ pile and precast driven pile.
Anu?
Yes.
There are a few questions. Can we take questions now?
Yeah, sure.
So Puneet Kumar asked, what is skin friction?
Skin friction is the friction between the soil and the concrete member. That is, as I told, the pile acts as a column below the soil. So that is where that is a friction between the concrete and the soil.
Okay. Then there was which footing? Puneet Kumar asked, which footing is most economical for the commercial building?
Commercial building. The sizing, the type of footing, decision on making the size of the footing or the type of the footing mainly depends upon the SPC of the soil. As I said, the soil bearing capacity should be, if it is very good, then we can go in with combined footings or isolated footings, separate footings, like we can go in with isolated footings connecting with strap beams rather than going on with a raft foundation. But if the soil is very bad, then there is no option. We have to go in with a raft or a pile foundation.
Okay. Ayush Abhishek had asked, is slope footing also called as trapezoidal footing?
Trapezoidal footing is different because sloped footing is the main thing is to save the concrete and reinforcement. So if you go in with a pad foundation, we normally use top reinforcement and bottom reinforcement. But if you're going on with a sloped footing, the top reinforcement can be eliminated. And the main thing is you have to maintain a angle of 45 degree at the slope.
Okay.
That is where you have to take care.
Great. Tausif had asked, what is the difference between footing and foundation?
Footing and foundation is one and the same. As I said, footing is also called as foundation, because in building we say it as footing as a structural element. Foundation is also the same, with 2 words. That's it.
Okay, great. I think we can break in another 20 minutes and ask for other questions. Guys,
Okay.
put in your questions. So there was Ayush was asking, what is bulb foundation used in sandy soil?
Bulb foundation is a type of pile foundation where the soil is very weak. Like where we go in with a pile foundation, we create a bulb-like structure in between to resist the forces and to create a friction.
Great.
Pile foundation, where pile foundation can be used is there is one question. Yeah, as I said, this pile foundation can be used where the soil is very clayey, where the groundwater table is above, near the ground level. So I think let's move on to the slides, Surya.
Yes, please.
Yes. So these are what we have seen about the substructures. Now let's see about column. So as I said, column is a vertical structural member that carries loads mainly in compression. It is assumed to be the most crucial structural member of a building because the safety of the whole building rests on the column strength. If the column fails, then the failure of column would cause progressive collapse in buildings, whereas such event would not occur when other members fail. Like if a beam fails, it is not that the whole building will collapse immediately. But if a column fails, it will lead to that kind of failure. So column transfers vertical loads from ceiling, floor, that is a roof slab, beams to the foundation. So they also carry bending moments about one or both of the cross-sectional axis. In some cases, when column is rested on a beam, it is called a floating column. That is, if you want to support a slab, then we no need to take column from the bottom. And in that worst case, we propose columns in the above the beam. That is called a floating column. Columns are designed in such a way that it will resist the lateral forces. The lateral forces like earthquake forces and the wind forces. So the effective length of the column exceeds 3 times the lateral dimension. Columns have to be connected to each other by beams so that the transfer of load is smooth. It is a very important structural member of a building, as I said, and hence special precautions must be taken during column casting. So now let's see about the types of columns. I think to go in with. Yeah. Types of columns. Based columns are categorized depending upon the shape, length, and moments. So based on the shape, columns are categorized into circular column, square column, and rectangular column. So that is depending upon the shape. Now let's see what is the how it is categorized upon length. So if the length by breadth ratio, that is length by breadth ratio is less than or equal to 12, then it is a short column. If the L by B ratio is greater than 12, it is long column, where L is the height of the column and B is the width of the column. And based on moments, column is designed for axial load, that is the vertical load, and moment in 2 direction, then it is called a biaxial column. If the column is designed for axial load and moment in one direction, it is called uniaxial column. In a building, most of the corner columns are biaxial because it will take loads from both the beams. Side columns are uniaxial, and some internal columns can be of any of these type. So now let's see about the construction methodology. How you cast a column, how you do the column check reinforcement, that is the checklist before concrete pouring and all those things. So the construction methodology for column is, first we have to check the column layout and the center line. Then we have to check the column reinforcement. Then it is column shuttering and then column concreting. So what is the layout of column? There will be a column layout drawing which shows the center line or exact position of each column at site according to the reference dimension from the architectural drawing. So hence we need to study the drawing of column layout carefully and check whether the location of the column is according to the reference or the architectural drawing, because if you make any mistakes in the column positioning, then it is very difficult to align when it comes up with when constructing a building. So these are the following checklist to be carried out before column casting or column reinforcement. The reinforcement should be checked, should be free from any loose scale or rust, mud or oil. And the main reinforcement and ring of column should be cut as per the required length. That is, before casting, we cut the length at site, so that special care needs to be taken while cutting. So the stirrups should be careful, cut in length, as extra length will result in less cover to concrete, and that will lead to honeycombing in the concrete structures, which is not advisable. So concrete, we have to maintain a concrete cover of 40 mm, which needs to be provided as cover block. We normally provide this cover block in the face of the rebar before the shuttering is done. So when the column reinforcement is rested on the reinforcement of footing on mat, that is, the rods has to be extended for at least 300 mm inside the reinforcement of the footing. So that is why we we provide rebars from the footing before casting the foundation. So in reinforcement of column, the area of longitudinal reinforcement should not be less than 0.8% and should not be more than 6%. This we have to keep it in mind while doing the design of column. It should not be, the column should not be over designed also. If the reinforcement is more than 6%, then that also will lead to failure of the column. You will develop cracks in the column. So that this should be taken care, that the percentage should be between 0.8 to 6%. It should not be less than 0.8 or neither more than 6%. So we have to take care that at least a minimum number of bars, 4 bars, shall be provided in the case of square or rectangular column. And if it is a circular column, then 6 bars with helical reinforcement should be provided. So the bars provided should not be less than 12 mm in diameter, and the spacing of the bars along the periphery of the column shall not exceed 300 mm. Then the longitudinal bars shall not be spaced more than 75 mm on either side, and the transverse reinforcement need only to go around the corner, and alternate bars should be provided for effective support. The diameter of the rings shall not be less than 1/4 of the diameter of the largest longitudinal bar, and in no case it should be less than 6 mm. However, we recommend to go in with 8 mm. Normally, nowadays we are not using the 6 mm dia rods also. The minimum dia rod used is 8 mm. So the main reinforcement bars and stirrups should be tied tightly together by using a binding wire of proper gauge. Preferably 16 mm gauge is preferable one. So we should check the size of the stirrups before tying, and this care should be taken that the hook angle in link or stirrups should be of 135 degree, so that it can It is very important condition for seismic design and seismic consideration. This alone will increase the building's capacity to withstand this earthquake force. Hence, it is very important condition to check the stirrups angle of 135 degree. So the lapping should be provided in central half of the member length, and lap length should not be 45D. Should be 45D, where D is the diameter of the bar. And the central half of member, the lapping bar should be alternate. It should not be in the same position. It should be in the alternate position if possible. So next is the spacing near support should be less, because it will be a junction for so the concrete might not, the pouring of concrete or vibrating the concrete is difficult. So the spacing near the support should be less, and the middle portion of the middle portion of the column. So before placing the concrete, the reinforcement details should be checked with a bar bedding schedule, and we should get an approval from the structural consultant. For example, I have given a bar bending schedule. So this is called the BBS. Normally, when you produce the reinforcement drawing, simultaneously we provide this BBS to site for them to understand how to cut the rod, how to cut the stirrups. All these details with the length details, it will be here, so that as I said, excessive rod will not be left over. So next is the column formwork. So this column carries the load of the structure, and it is a critical part, as I said. So this column needs to be aligned vertically to take up the load transmitted. And the column shuttering should be strong enough to take up the pressure. When we pour the fresh concrete into the column boxes, it should resist, or it should be able to take up the loads and remain in position during concrete. So proper care should be taken while shuttering. So let's see what are the guidelines to be carried out before column casting, that is during shuttering. Earlier was the reinforcement guideline. This is for column formwork shuttering guideline. So now first we have to check the size of the shuttering for column. That is whether the column shuttering whatever we have provided is as per the size specified in the drawing. And we have to check the center line of the column with respect to the adjacent column, whether it is specified in the drawing. Then the column shuttering should be strong enough, as I said, to take the pressure of fresh concrete and remain in position, particularly when vibrator is applied. We normally apply vibrator to avoid honeycombs in a column. So to hold the concrete shuttering firmly in place, proper alignment or concrete starter called kicker should be casted before fixing the shuttering of the same concrete mix. What concrete mix we are pouring, the same concrete mix should be used to prepare the kickers. So the starter should be hard enough to fix the shuttering around it. So this is how the column shuttering is done at site. So if you can see, nowadays we use this kind of shuttering, not a simple plywood. And we have provided the shuttering angles at a 45 degree prop angle to support while pouring of concrete. So column box or shuttering for column should be made up of plywood sheets or steel sheets fabricated with adequate planks and stiffness. So nowadays we go in with steel sheets only. Normally for residential buildings we use plywood sheets. So water-based, we have to use a thin film of oil, that is water-based shuttering oil should be applied on the shutters so that it gives a good finish on the surface of the concrete. And this applying of oil also helps us to de-shutter the column formwork after the concrete hardens. It makes our work easier, and it increases the life of the shuttering equipment also. So if you don't apply oil or grease in the place of shuttering oil, you should not apply oil, normal oil or grease, because it will the grease will leave a dark mark on the surface of the concrete, and it is very difficult to remove the grease from the construction joint. When we provide construction joints in the column, it is very difficult to remove the grease from the construction joint, and which may result in cracks in the concrete in future. So this shuttering needs to be aligned properly for verticality, and that should be taken special care about the verticality of the column, and diagonals also needs to be checked for accurate dimension. The shuttering for column can be removed after 24 hours of casting, and the gaps in the shuttering needs to be sealed with plaster or piece of wood to avoid leakage of slurry when concrete pouring happens. So shuttering needs to be carefully removed, that no damage occurs to the corners of the column. That corners of the column should not get chipped off while shuttering is removing. Then diagonals needs to be checked to ensure the occurrence in dimension. So this is what the guidelines which we need to follow in column shuttering. This is how, as I said, this is the steel shutterings now we use, and this is how the prop angle we use for the shuttering of columns. So this is the concreting of column. So columns can be concreted in two ways. That is a manual concreting, which you can see on the left side of the pic, and with the help of pumping machine. That is nowadays we use ready mix concrete and use pumps to pour the concrete at greater heights. So for small construction, we go in with normal manual concreting methodology. So what are the points to be followed? I'm going in detail about columns because this is the main structural element, and special care needs to be taken during concreting and pouring. So now points to be followed before and after concreting. So concreting for smaller portion, as I said, we can go in with manually operated, but when the area is huge, it has to be done using pumping machines. So column, when you are pouring concrete to the columns, it should be poured till the slab bottom, and it should not be left, and proper vibration has to be provided to avoid honeycombs and also segregation. So while pouring, it should be poured and compacted in layers, and it should be vibrated while pouring itself. The target slump, that is, as we saw earlier, the slump test, when a batch of concrete comes to site, we have to first do the slump cone test, and the target slump to be achieved is 160 mm, and the height of pouring should not exceed 1.5 mm. It should not be like you have the pipes placed at a larger height and pour the concrete. So construction joints, we normally avoid it, but in certain places it is under unavoidable situation, we have to provide construction joint. Then the cover needs to be checked whether it is placed properly, or the shuttering, the distance between the outer face of the column and the reinforcement cannot be maintained if the cover is not maintained properly. So the temperature while pouring the concrete should not be below should not be below 30, because if it is a rainy day, then we don't normally do concreting. So final thing is the column needs to be checked for verticality, and horizontal dimension needs to be checked. So this is the end of column details. So we have seen about column, or types of column, formwork, reinforcement in column, and concreting of column. So now I'm going to now we are going on with beams. So if you have any queries, you can just ask in the message.
Okay. So I'll see the messages right now. Puneet Kumar is asking which type of concreting can achieve accurate strength?
Normally for building construction, we normally go in with M25 and M30 grade. And again, as I said, for every structure, while designing, the structural engineer will give you the grade of concrete to be used for the structure, and which is used to design For if it is designed, if the building is designed for M25 grade, then you have to go in with M25 grade. If the structure is about to take up a heavy load, then the structural engineer will be designing it for M30 grade. At that case, the concrete mix design will be done for M30 grade, and it will be used at site.
Great. Nayan is asking, is column a tension member or compression member?
Column is a compression member. I've specified this in my earlier slide. Column is a compression member.
Okay. Urmi is asking, what is shuttering? Would that be formwork?
Yeah, formwork is called the shuttering. That as I've shown you here. This is what a shuttering is. You can see here, provided with prop angles. It will be clear in this. See, the reinforcement is provided with cover blocks, and this is how the shuttering is provided. And we provide it. We tie it with a proper shuttering is done with prop angle to avoid the concrete to come out while concreting is done.
And Puneet is asking, why hook angle should be 135 degrees only?
It is as per the requirement of IS code that hook angle to be maintained at 135 degrees for seismic designed buildings.
Okay. And Abhinav Dubey is asking, how can we decide the number of bars for different columns?
It is nominally we have to provide 4 bars at the 4 corners of a column, and minimum dia is 12 mm, and as per the loading, how much the column has to withstand, that is identified by column design.
And this is where usually civil engineers basically use tools like say AutoCAD, StatPro, or ETABS to kind of understand the load and design the components, right?
Yeah, in tomorrow's session, I will be teaching you about how to calculate the dead load, live load, wind load for a building as per IS 875. I will be teaching you manual design, so that after calculating the manual design, you will be applying those loads in the software. Because normally software will not take up the dead load and live load by its own. We have to calculate manually, and then we have to apply. So that is why I'm having a session tomorrow to calculate these kind of loads.
Okay. Do you want to take a few more questions, or do you want to?
We will go in with beams, because I think we are running short of time. I think I have to explain beams, slabs. We have
sure. Yes, we'll go ahead and we'll answer your questions at the end also.
At the end
thank you.
Yeah. So now let's see what is a beam. Like column is a vertical member, beam is a horizontal structural element that can withstand vertical loads, shear forces, and bending moments. So the loads applied to a beam results in reaction forces at the support points of the beam. So the total effect of all the forces acting on the beam is to produce shear forces and bending moment within the beam, that in turn will induce internal stresses, strains, and deflection of the beam. That is where we calculate upon design, we calculate number of rods and all those things to be provided in the construction of a beam. So beams can be made of wood, steel, aluminium, but most commonly for a framed structure we go in with RCC, that is reinforced cement concrete beams. Beams can be of different shape, like rectangular, square, and T-beam or H-beam in the case of steel sections. So most important in a beam is its supporting system. So now let's see how the beam supports the beam rests in the supports. So the supports are the actual condition in which the load is distributed. So there are three types of supports. If you see the roller support, the hinged or pin support, and the fixed support. All these kind of supports you might have studied in structural analysis paper. So the structural analysis of beam will be depending upon the supports. So now let's see what is a roller support. So this roller support provides only one directive resistive force to the beam. That is, either it will be having a it will be having only a upward vertical force, and because of that it will be resting on a 2 column. If you, for example, a beam is placed on a wall, it has only one reaction force, that is only the downward reaction force. Other than that, it doesn't have a any other forces acting on that. So when it is rested, only one forces is acting on a roller support. So when you take a hinge or a pin support, in a hinge or a pin support, you can see the free body diagram. You will be having horizontal forces and the vertical forces, that is the upward force and the horizontal forces acting on a beam. So this is for example, you can see an bridge on supported by 2 pillars. You will be having a horizontal force and a vertical force if it is properly supported, like hinged or pin support. So it is a fixed support. Now let's see a fixed support. You have 3-dimensional angle. So here, if you see, you will be having a vertical force, horizontal force, and a moment created. So fixed supports are support that provides resistance to the forces as well as to the moment. So now let's see what are the types of classification of beams based on these supports. So the beams are classified as cantilever beam, where we will be having only one support at one end. We will be seeing in detail the types of classification of beams. So cantilever beam, simply supported beam, overhanging beam, fixed beam, continuous beam, and propped cantilever beam. So what is a cantilever beam? So now in this figure, it is very much explanatory that it is having a fixed support at one end. So cantilever beams are beams that are supported only in one end, and the other end is left opened. So it has tension at the top and compression at the bottom. So we have to provide reinforcement accordingly. Compression will be taken up by the concrete. So we will be providing, for a cantilever beam, we will be providing reinforcement at the top alone to take up the tension load. So next is the simply supported beam. Simply supported beams are beams that are supported at both the ends. So this beam will be having a single span and or simple beams. These are the normal beams which we design for buildings. So if it is supported by 2 columns, then it is we design it as a simply supported beam. Next is the overhanging beam. So overhanging beam, this is a beam. This beam is a combination of simply supported and cantilever beam. That is, you will be having the supports. The beam will be supported by 2 columns, and you will be having a length of beam extended outside the column. So it acts as a simply supported beam and a cantilever beam. So the extension, it extends beyond the supports. That is called a overhanging beam. So continuous beams. So continuous beams are beams that have more than 2 spans and more than 3 supports along its length. The supports are in one straight line, and so the span also lies in a straight line. In this type, if you see, a continuous beam can be seen in places where you have 2 columns supported at the ends, and these beams will be crossing numerous number of secondary beams in between. So that is where we come across this continuous beams. So fixed end beam. Fixed end beams are beams whose both ends are fixed, and fixed beams are also inbuilt and encased beam. The reinforcement of these beams normally goes through beam into the column. So these beams will go across the columns also, will cross all the columns in between, and it will be in the continuous form. In a simply supported beam, we will break the reinforcement. All these beams are designed and detailed in such a way the supports are provided. So that is, while designing, we design it as a simply supported support. Then the beam is called a propped cantilever beam, as shown in the figure. So these RCC beams are further classified depending upon the reinforcement as singly reinforced beam and doubly reinforced beam. If these beams, if the reinforcement is provided only in one side, that is only in the bottom side, then that is in the tension side, where the steel takes up the tensile load and concrete takes up the compression in the other side, then it is a singly reinforced beam. So in a doubly reinforced beam, the reinforcement will be provided both in the top layer and in the bottom layer. So both the tension and the compression phase will be having reinforcement in a doubly reinforced beam. So these kind of beams are provided in places where we have heavy loads, or we have heavy loads from the slab. We go in with doubly reinforced beams. So in an RC framed structure, beams are provided at different levels and they are named in different way. If the beam is provided in the plinth level, that is in the level when when the column comes up from the footing below the ground level, these columns are tied at the grade level or plinth level. So that beam tying of columns at the grade level is called a grade beam or a plinth beam, above which the walls, the bricks are lined up for wall construction. So if the beams are provided at tie level, that is to break the height of the column, then it is called a tie beam. And if it is provided in the sill level, then it is called, for in the name of lintels, we name it as above the windows, then it is called a lintel beam. So let's see what is a grade beam. As I said, you can see the grade beam resting on the ground. So plinth beams are RCC beams resting on the ground level that connects the column from the foundation. So the main purpose of plinth beam is to support the walls. And this plinth beam distributes the load of the wall to the foundation evenly, directly to the foundation through the through the column below the ground. So this plinth beam prevents the cracks in walls and also protects the foundation settlement in foundation. It is mandatory to provide plinth beams in seismic prone zones because it will create a fixity for the structural element. So it will create a mass or fixity for the structural element and avoids the collapse of the building during earthquake. So now let's see the formwork for plinth beam. What are the criteria to be followed? Like shuttering for plinth beam, the points to be taken care of. So the PCC of appropriate gate, normally we go in with PCC below the footing, and also for the grade beam we go in with PCC. That PCC should be done before starting shuttering for the ground beam, and it should be properly levered and in perfect line. So leveling of the ground should be taken care before laying the grade beam. So PCC shall extend minimum 50 mm beyond the width of the beam. If the width of the beam is 230, the PCC should be laid 50 mm on both the sides. On excess of 50 mm PCC should be laid on both the faces of the beams, and it should be a minimum of 150 mm in natural ground, so that the earth filled within the walls and or beam does not escape during plinth beam filling. So the soil on which the beam is laid should be compacted properly and should not sag if there is a curing or pouring of water, that is curing, or account of settlement of loose soil happens. So formwork needs to be installed and secured prior to concrete placement. The shuttering should be dry and shall be cleaned carefully before concreting is done. So the formwork needs to be installed and secured prior to concrete placement. We have to check the formwork installed before the concrete is done. So we have to check the size of the beam and the shuttering, whether it is provided as per the drawing, whether the reinforcement placed is as per the drawing, and the tying is done properly before pouring of the concrete. And here the special thing we have to taken care is the junction between the beam and the column is tight and should not bulge during concrete, because or else we will the junctions will bulge and it will lead to honeycombs in columns or beams. And the concrete needs to be compacted properly to avoid steel bars from aggressive elements, so that the steel bars get not exposed outside, which will cause the reinforcement to corrode. So that needs to be specially taken care. And width of the beam is normally provided matching the thickness of the block wall. If the block wall is 200 mm, then normally we go in with
grade beam of 200 mm, or if the wall is 230, then we go in with 230 mm. That is the nominal practice we follow at site. So you can see how the formwork is done for plinth beams here, and it is rested on soil. Plinth beams are one which is rested on soil, and you can see the PCC laid below the plinth beams. Here next is the reinforcement for plinth beam. So it is normally recommended to provide at least 2 bars of 12 mm dia at the top and bottom for a plinth beam. Either it is not required, we normally provide 12 mm dia or 2 bars at the top and at the bottom for a plinth beam. And the reinforcement bars need to be protected with cover. Like 40 mm cover for columns, here we have to follow a cover of 25 to 30 mm for beams. So minimum stirrup diameter should be of 6 mm with a minimum spacing of 150 mm need to be adapted. We normally go in with 125 mm also, but it's better if you go reduce the spacing, then again the concrete will not go inside properly, and it will lead again to honeycombing. So it is mandatory if you follow 150 mm at least at the middle of the beams. So stirrups must be provided at junction of beams and columns, which is normally ignored in all the cases. So it should be special care should be taken that stirrups are provided at the junction of beams and columns. So now it is a tie beam. So this tie beam is normally provided to reduce the effective length of the column. So this thereby reduces the slenderness ratio of the column too, and prevents the column from buckling. So this tie beam is also used to transfer any kind of load from the slab to the column and thereby to the foundation. If the height of the column is increases, it is above 4 meters or 5 meters, as per codal norms, if the column height goes beyond 4 meters, then it is mandatory to provide a tie beam, or else it will lead to buckling of column. So that is where the tie beam is provided, and floor beam is provided at floor levels. That is, it is a normal floor roof slab level, that is called the floor beam, or it is called it is also normally some people call that beams also as tie beam. So floor beam is a beam that supports the floor load, that is the slab load of the building, and directly transfers the same load to the adjacent columns and thereby to the foundation. Construction of these beams is the same that of plinth beam. How you can, that is the only difference is you provide PCC for plinth beam below the shuttering. In other beams, we don't provide PCC below. We just provide the RCC and the reinforcement. Otherwise, the construction and formwork is one and the same for these kind of buildings, beams. So next is the slabs. So slab is a structural element which is constructed to create a flat and useful surface such as floors, roofs, ceilings, and it is a horizontal structural component with top and bottom surface parallel to each other. So commonly slabs are supported by beams, columns, walls, or to the normally we have grade slab also that rests on the ground, which is used in industrial flooring. So the depth of the concrete slab is very small compared to its span. Normally the thickness of the slab will be something around 125 mm to 150 mm. If it is of a heavy structure, then we go in with 200 to 250 mm. For residential building, we go in with 100 to 125 mm thickness slab. So there are two types of slab. So can you tell what is a one-way slab? I think I've already written here. Yeah. Can anyone message in what is a one-way slab and what is a two-way slab, and how you do the what are the difference between a one-way slab or a two-way slab?
Can you repeat that question once?
What are the two types that I have explained about the two types of slab? So what is a one-way slab and what is a two-way slab? What is the difference? Main difference of a one-way slab or a two-way slab.
Rishabh Parmar is saying L by B is greater than or equal to
I've
2.
already given here. Yeah. Any other thing you know about a one-way slab or a two-way slab?
Direction. Vishal is saying direction. Direction of the slab.
Okay. Yeah. Is right. So one-way slab is a slab which is supported by beams on two opposite sides to carry the load along one direction. And if the L by B ratio is greater than or equal to 2, then we go in with one-way slab. This slab will bend in only one direction. And that direction is also in the shorter span. This slab will tend to bend in the shorter span direction. So that is where we go in with, if the L by B ratio is greater than or equal to 2, then we will go in with one-way slab. And if the L by B ratio is less than 2, then we go in with a two-way slab. And in the two-way slab, all the four sides are supported by beams, and the loads are carried by the supports along both directions. So this is the difference between a one-way slab and a two-way slab. Now let's see about the formwork for slabs. So the formwork for slab is because you have to do the formwork for a huge area. So special care needs to be taken during shuttering. The quality of the shuttering plates should be good. First, you have to check the quality of the shuttering plates, because to avoid using plates with uneven surface or damaged edges, they must be of regular size. So next is the if plywood, if you are using in with plywood, then we should go in with that boiling water point grade plywood, that is BWP grade, or we can go in with alternate like steel shuttering, because we will be doing curing of the slab. So it will tend to we have to pour excess water for curing. So that's why we are specifically going on with BWP grade. So the shuttering, before shuttering, you have to take concerned approval from the engineer in charge. While they will be checking the reinforcement, the diameter of the reinforcement is used as per the diagram or not, that the drawing or not. So the engineer will also check the slope, the level of the slab, whether the slab and the beam, because while casting the slab, we do it in the same way that the slab and the beam will be casted together. It is not like we cast the beam separately and the slab separately. Shuttering will be done in such a way the slabs and beams are done. Scaffolding will be done in the same way, and so special care should be taken. That will be a preliminary inspection before commencing of tying of reinforcement. So shuttering should be hard enough to withstand the load of concrete and impact of concrete, and impact produced during placing of concrete and during vibrations. So the same way, oil has to be applied on the shuttering plates, so that the shuttering can be easily removed after concrete gets its initial strength. While doing a slab shuttering, you should be taken care that the bottom plank of the beam should be straight. It should not bend. So the bottom plank should be straight. So before casting of the slab, all shuttering gaps should be closed, either by a and particular attention to be provided at the column beam junction, at the beam side, so beam side and slab bottom junction, beam side to beam bottom junction. All these junctions should be taken special care while doing formwork for slab and beam. And the slab thickness should be marked on the sides of the slab, and wooden props should be avoided as far as possible, because that may tend to slip off. So props must be braced in both direction by tubes or fixed couplers, and that angle of 45-degree prop angle should be maintained for safety purposes. So then before concreting, water should be sprinkled over the shuttering of the slab. So these are the basic guidelines for formwork of slabs. So now next see the reinforcement for beams and slabs. I've taken up with there I explained the plinth beams. Here I am combining the beams and slabs as the reinforcement is done together when you go on the upper floors. So the for reinforcement of beams and slabs, proper the reinforcement should be checked and should be free from scale or rust or mud, and proper cover for reinforcement should be provided at the slab bottom and beam bottom and side walls also. And the reinforcement of slab must be properly aligned, and because the slab bends, and the bend height should not be 12.5 mm. That is the standard which is followed as per the IS code. And the slab thickness, that is without the slab thickness without cover. So we have to make sure that size and spacing of reinforcement is as per the drawing, particularly the main reinforcement of slab and beam. And beam bars should be passing the column reinforcement fully. It is not that we provide the lap or we break the reinforcement when it goes to the column. It should run across the columns because we do the design in such a way that considering the beam and column reinforcement is passing through it. So we have to provide MS chase in the case of cantilever slab reinforcement, and the laps of the beam or slab should be provided as per the detailed drawing issued to the site. And lap should we should not keep the lap in the middle of the beam or slab if we have a longer span. And the lap should be provided in an alternate pattern. It should not be in the same location of a beam or slab. It should be in alternate positions. So the stirrups must be provided at the junction of beams and columns, which is normally neglected. And doubles for future construction should be left out from the slabs if you are planning to extend the in the future. If you are planning to extend the building, or if you are planning to raise the building, then double bars should be left out for future expansion in columns and slabs. And parapet bars also should be left for balconies and staircase while casting the slabs.